episode of the Sri Lankan Understanding, a program where we explore things about Sri Lanka, and from our point of view, we are looking at the historical, archaeological and cultural past in order to understand who we were so that we can understand the future better. My name is Lilanka Botejue and I'm a tea trainer and marketer by day, and at night I'm a writing owl, and I also have a passion for archaeology which I follow through an MSc. And I have with me here Chryshane.
And I'm Chryshane Mendis. I work in cultural diplomacy during the day, and like Lilanka, I am an independent researcher in archaeology and history at night and over the weekends. And yeah, so my postgraduate qualifications are also in archaeology, and I focus mainly on military landscapes and fortifications.
Yes, and so today we have a very interesting episode that Chryshane and I are going to discuss. It's to do with the early settlements of Sri Lanka. Yeah. What are they, what's the time period, and why do we need to learn about them? So in terms of early settlements, Chryshane, would you like to explain what do we mean by settlements and urban settlements?
Yes, so thanks Lilanka, and in this case we are talking about mainly the urban settlements, yes, not necessarily the villages or the gamas. Yes. But there is only a handful of sites, with the largest site being Anuradhapura, the oldest and largest. And when we say settlement, we mean urban settlement, we mean a space where there is lots of clustered settlements around it and had various functions, including trade, commerce, administration, transport, industry, everything. So it's not like a standard village where most of the people will be doing relatively the same economic activity, whereas these are
more hub,
more larger settlements, yes, where they bring various crafts people from different locations together, ideally in a strategic route, and generally these also start from simple villages, but during various factors
they evolve. And so it's we are talking about a transition from the hunter-gatherer nomadic lifestyle to a more settled location, yes, when we talk about the past. So in terms of settlements, urban settlements, and how we analyze them. So now you mentioned Anuradhapura. As you know, Anuradhapura has a historic period, which is what you call written history, and then you have a prehistory, which is where you don't have written records, but you have material evidence. Yes. And I think that is where urban settlements fit in the more material evidence segment, where we look at physical things that have been left behind from that period and how that tells us about the past. So as you know, archaeology is actually a study, it's the past tense of anthropology, that's what they say. So we learn about how people in the past lived. So when it comes to urban settlements, so one of the, I think some areas we need to look at is the tools that we use to analyze this. So now when we talk about, in the next bits, we are going to talk about Anuradhapura and a few other places. We have things called stratigraphy and things called layer analysis. So what are these things? And it's important to understand, I think, from a layman's point of view. Chryshane, would you care to explain what stratigraphy means?
Yes, so basically stratigraphy means the study of the different layers. If you're taking a settlement site, there would be different occupational layers over time, especially if it's hundreds and hundreds of years old, it would have been reoccupied on many occasions. And so how these different layers get built up is they can be partly natural. So you maybe build on one layer, you build on the surface, it's occupied for a couple of decades, then you abandon the place. So then all the rubble maybe crumbles down, it gets taken over the forest, there could be a flood, then you get sediments depositing, and then again people come and build over again. So again they fill up their cut foundations, build their houses. Then there can be a fire, so again those buildings are destroyed. Again you fill up, and so like that you see these different layers. And so archaeologically, if you dig a trench deep down, and we always
vertically down into the earth,
we go to the bedrock. So from there we know that's where the natural starts.
Base is. Bedrock, and then you can
identify. So the archaeologist's eyes are trained to identify these various features in the profile.
In the layers.
As you are digging down, and when you dig to the lowest level, and when you see the profile on the
side
soil,
here,
you can see the different features. You will find artifacts, building foundations, but you
pottery
see this
bits,
layer, exactly. And so, like I had this question asked a lot, like how come such places have meters and meters of human settlements? And I tell them an interesting story that I observed as a kid. So my grandparents' ancestral home was right next to mine, and there was a standard 1930s house built of kabuk. And so in around 2011, they demolished the house. And when they demolished it, so since it was kabuk, it was easy to flatten it. So they removed most of the walls, and the foundation they just flattened it, filled the entire land with the pieces, the rubble from the house. And then about a year later, when they were building the new house, they brought soil from outside, again filled it, stamped it, and then they cut the foundations for the new house. So the ground level where my father grew up, or my grandparents' ground level, is actually about a foot or two below the current ground level of where that house is.
Right.
But it's in the same time
span of not even 100 years.
Just 10, 15,
10,
20
50,
years.
20 years.
And yet it's there. So like even I live in close to the Nigamba Road, and even that I have seen how about 10 years ago when they redid the Nigamba Road, recarpeted it, they actually filled it and raised, in certain sections they raised it about a foot high.
Okay.
So the Nigamba Road of my childhood is actually about 1 foot
below.
So imagine this process being over
thousands of years. Exactly.
So that's why the interesting point in Anuradhapura is the earliest settlement layers is 9 meters below the surface of the inner city of Anuradhapura. That's crazy.
Crazy.
And that shows how deep time the city is.
Yes, and also see that, so the stratigraphy is that those layers, and when you're analyzing and when you clear out the trenches, you do it layer by layer, right? So that each layer...
There is destruction in there, so that's why even in archaeology, excavation is considered a destructive methodology, because you can't once you remove those.
And that's why you dig only a segment, you don't just go digging up the whole place.
There is nothing
let me dig. You know, you very... what you call strategically identify a segment, and then you don't go, say for example, if there's a old palace in there, you're not digging in the middle of that. You'd select a corner or some place where you can get the required evidence, but at the same time you don't destroy what has been left behind. So even in this layer analysis, I think what people see is that's why each layer tells you a different story about that era. And of course, as Chryshane talks, you will hear about him saying disturbed layers. Now, due to various factors, environmental, animal, human factors. Now, for example, say your house was built. Now, say nobody bothered with disturbing the layers. But say now, for example, when it comes to archaeological sites, people think, oh, there are this Nidan Vastu thing that Sri Lankans love digging for. So every old archaeological building has some great treasure at the bottom, is the general belief. So you have grave robbers, you have looters who go and disturb the layers. Now, when you have disturbed layers like that, what you have is interference from the present time into a past.
Exactly.
So you cannot then analyze it as a untouched layer. So therefore, you get this a lot. When we talk about like Anuradhapura, you will see that.
The site in Jaffna,
where
we'll be speaking in a bit, the first 1 or 2 feet is actually disturbed layer. So you have like very ancient pottery, and you have like pieces of plastic and
from modern times,
everything in it.
Yeah, so that's what happens. So when the layer is disturbed, what happens is you cannot get a clear analysis.
Exactly. So you can't take an artifact out of that layer and say, okay, this artifact is dated to the 10th century, so that layer is the 10th century.
Yeah, exactly. So this is a bit scientific here, but now we're going in for a commercial break, and we will talk about the early urban settlements of Sri Lanka in our next bit. Stay tuned. So, we are back again here on our episode discussing the early urban settlements of Sri Lanka, and here now I'm with Chryshane, and we are going to focus on Anuradhapura, Tissa, Maharama and Kantarodai. Chryshane has done some research in those areas. So, let's talk about what these early urban settlements are and what they yield. In terms of the time frame, Chryshane, what are we talking about?
So, basically these 3 sites that you just mentioned in academia, they are understood as the earliest urban centers in the island, in the country. And of course, the earliest and largest of these is Anuradhapura. So that's why even from the known historical narrative, we know it was the capital of the Anuradhapura kingdom for 1,500 years, which is amazing.
Yes.
But actually the earliest layers of Anuradhapura as a settlement where people lived together in a clustered way is dated to the 9th century BC. So we know how Vijaya comes in the 5th century BC, and Anuradhapura's founding is described actually relatively well in the Mahavamsa under the episode of King Pandukabhaya, where once he claims the monarchy, he establishes the city. It was an existing city, they mentioned that, but they show how he divides the city, the roads, the walls, and
so
everything.
You're talking about 3,500 years roughly
so
ago.
Yeah, if you look at the archaeology of Anuradhapura, almost almost 3,000 years.
3,000 years. So when we say BC, now I think this is something we just need to explain a little bit. You would have seen this everywhere. 3,000 BC, 300 BC. What does BC mean? So BC means before Christ. So because this is European terminology, right? So they take the year of our Lord, the year that Jesus was born, as the year 0. So that becomes 2,000 years ago. And that is AD, so Anno Domini. So everything after that year is AD,
and
before that is before Christ, BC. But now we currently use the terminology current era, CE, for the current year.
To make it non-religious.
To make it non-religious and more non-partial, impartial. And then you have BCE, which is before current era. So when you're saying BC, you need to add in 2,000 years. So when you say 900 BC, you're adding 2,000 plus 900,
exactly.
So you're talking about almost 3,000 years. That's how you do the math. Okay. So basically what you're saying is Anuradhapura, the earliest archaeological evidence shows urban settlements from almost 3,000 years ago. Okay, which is great. So tell us a little bit about...
so I mean, Anuradhapura, what we know from the monuments, from the chronicles, was a city mainly built by King Pandukabhaya. He was the official first king of Anuradhapura, and then it continues to Devanam Tissa, and what we know that it finally ended in the 11th century when the Cholas invaded and destroyed the city. And surprisingly enough, so even when the British started exploring these ruins archaeologically in the mid 19th century, of course the monastic sites were known, the Ruwanwälisaya, Minisavatiya, Jethavanarama, and Abegiriya, those monastic sites, they were on the surface, large, you can't miss them.
Yeah, they are very visible.
Exactly. So those were the sites that were first mapped out.
Right.
And yet then by the time the Mahavamsas got translated into English, and so then those early scholars were reading these great descriptions of the city, and yet they found only the monastic sites and not the city itself.
Okay.
So it took a couple of decades for them to realize that these monastic sites are actually outside the citadel.
The periphery of the city, yes.
And so the actual citadel where the king was, where all the trading would have taken place, most of the nobles would have been, the real urban core is actually between currently the Jethavanarama monastery complex and the Abegiriya in the north.
Right.
So between these two, along the Sangamita Mavata, that area is currently just scattered with few houses and guest houses, and only about 2-3 prominent ruins are known, the Vijayabahu Palace from the 10th century and the Mahapali Danashala, which is considered part of the Dalada Maligava of the inner city. And so these are the few ruins that are known at present, and yet people don't really go there. Everyone goes to see the Ruwanwälisaya or the Abegiriya.
Yeah, or for pilgrimage to the Sri Mahabodhi.
But then in the early 20th century or in the early 1900s, the surveys actually started mapping this out, and then they actually found the moat and the rampart around this city. So it's almost about 1 square kilometer in extent. And of course, throughout the last 100 years, there have been excavations on the ramparts, and certain sites have been preserved. But again, since not many people go here, they are again in the jungle. So even last year, I was in Anuradhapura and I tried to look for the eastern gate, which I know was conserved and restored, but I couldn't find it. I got lost somewhere in the park.
Oh, right.
So it's very much neglected.
Okay.
And so the story of the archaeology of Anuradhapura is actually the story of archaeology itself. So archaeology evolves as this whole antiquarian approach and looking for these large-scale monuments that are mentioned in chronicles, and that's why the attention was given firstly to
the buildings and the monuments,
the stupas, the big stupas, the Mahapali Danashala. So Senarath Parnavitana's time, it was slowly transitioning to ask more scientific questions, and so that's where Dr. Siran Deranigala comes in, as he's regarded as the father of scientific archaeology in Sri Lanka. So he starts his research by the late 1960s. That is exactly the same time frame where or processual archaeology,
yes.
the formal term we know it.
Archaeology evolved from, like, so the antiquities is like, if you look at ancient times, people were into collecting monuments.
Yes, or objects.
Or objects, or what they saw. That's why you have Roman pillars in people's houses and all.
Exactly, for the fascination you hear,
yes.
you read all these stories in books.
And Sri Lankans still follow this, right? They want to dig up something and put it in their house. But the thing is, that's not how you do it.
Exactly.
So it evolved as a scientific discipline, and Anuradhapura, as we said, is very, very important in this because it yielded all these layers as well as understanding.
I mean, until that point, they were just excavating and restoring the large monuments and going with the narrative in the historical accounts.
Exactly.
But Dharanigala wanted to go further and in an archaeologically scientific way see what exactly is the extent of the city, when exactly it was. And his hunch proved right, and he dug a massive trench in the center, and that showed various different building layers that went quite below the surface, like
and below the historical record as well, which is what is very important.
So throughout the 1980s and 90s, there were almost 14 large excavation pits dug into the city in different locations, and gone all the way to bedrock. So you have this. Like we said earlier, the stratigraphy at different levels and the radiocarbon dates. And so there is when you see, so we think the city was founded in the 4th century BC, but then it shows before the 4th century BC also there was a large town there. And it was about 50, like in 900 BC, it's about 10 hectares in extent. And then slowly when you come to about the 7th century BC, 200 years later, you see it slowly expanding to about 100 hectares. And by the 3rd century BC, Anuradhapura is actually one of the largest urban centers in South Asia. So this has been acknowledged by Indian archaeologists as well. That there are about 6 or 7 large urban centers in the Indian subcontinent, and south of the Narmada river is Anuradhapura.
That's very interesting. So we will go for a small commercial break now, and then afterwards we'll talk a little bit about Tissa, Maharama and Kantarodai before we finish up. So stay tuned. Hi, so we are back here to discuss the urban settlements, the earliest urban settlements in Sri Lanka. So Chryshane and I were just discussing Anuradhapura. So right now we are going to go into Tissa, Maharama and Kantarodai. So Chryshane, tell me what you have learnt in your research of Tissa, Maharama in terms of its earliest urban settlements.
Yeah, so like we were discussing earlier, Anuradhapura is one of the largest and the oldest. And then, of course, everyone knows through the chronicles, there was the sort of a southern principality or kingdom known as Ruhuna. And then the capital of that was the site of Mahagama or Tissa, Maharama. So again, you have this lovely rectangular urban core with ramparts and moats, which wasn't really noticed until the 1980s actually. And again, it was built up. So this area is just north of the modern Tissa, Maharama town. And it's more residential. So in the 1990s, there was a German-Sri Lankan collaboration. It ran for about 10 or 15 years. And that project, they again, like in Anuradhapura, they dug these 3 large trenches into the bedrock, and they found out that yes, similar to Anuradhapura, this citadel also was quite extensive, and it didn't go all the way till the 9th century. The earliest layers, to be honest, the final report is actually coming out soon by next year. I know that it's being written, so it has the earliest radiocarbon dates. But the sort of urban layers begin from the 4th century BC.
That's still 2,500 years.
Yeah, still exactly.
So and it's a long time.
You find these lovely streets and built out of bricks and everything. And the photographs they have taken, these reports are available online in publications or even in the libraries. And it's amazing when you see these large-scale bricks and
no one would think of Tissa, Maharama as an early urban settlement location. Like we said earlier, we always think Anuradhapura, Tippalonnaruwa. But see, so you're talking about a 2,500-year history down south.
Down south, with large-scale brick structures and roof tiles and everything. So in the research, in 3 trenches they dug, the southern area of the citadel was, they believe it's a series of workshops. So they found mud huts as well as lines of furnaces which used to produce various metals.
Metals, iron.
So that would have been
steel,
the workman's quarter, they titled it.
Okay, great.
And where all the production would have taken place. They found a street, a well, everything. It's amazing. And then towards the western area, they believe that area would have been more for the urban elite, where they found much larger houses, and depending on the artifacts found, there was like a copper cosmetic set dated to the 2nd century BC.
Yes, and there are pictures of that. Ladies, take note. Remember doing cosmetics even at that time.
Exactly.
Right. Yeah, that's great. I know. I saw that picture and I was thrilled. I was like, oh, they were doing eyeliner. Yes.
And it looks recognizable to modern day
to modern day makeup.
Out of copper.
Right, exactly. So what about Kantarodai?
Kantarodai is the other interesting site that is in north of Sri Lanka, in Jaffna. So
Jaffna,
it's along the Jaffna-Kankasanturai road, very close to the town of Chunnakam. And so most people know Kantarodai or Kandurugoda as the site of that monastic complex. So it's that famous monastic site dated to the 6th century AD with a cluster of small stupas. It's very unique, but not many people realize that that monastic site is actually part of a large urban center. And this was discovered in the early 1900s by Sir Pauli Pieris. And from the 1960s onwards, there have been sporadic excavations again, digging trenches deep down, and even I myself was part of an excavation there.
Nice.
And we find so much of pottery, roof tiles, discarded animal bones that are consumed, and coins and everything. So again, they based on the analysis, it's about 22 hectares in extent.
Wow.
And you believe it would have been largely a maritime trading city. So that's why a lot of marine animals were consumed. You find a lot of pottery that like the lovely rouletted ware.
So rouletted is, doing it on a roulette means it had advanced to a certain level of the civilization.
Yes, so
Others earliest pottery is handmade.
Yeah, so it's a very fine grey ware. It's made out of like fine grey clay and with a shiny surface, and it's supposed to originate in the Ganges.
Yeah, in India.
In India, around it starts around the 3rd or 2nd century BC. And you find this in all important settlement sites throughout the Indian Ocean, in Anuradhapura, Tissa, Maharama, Mantai, everywhere, and even in other countries as well. And so that's actually a very strong indicator of international trade.
And what's also important to remember is that now we look at countries demarcated as we are today, but 2000 years ago, we look at things regionally.
Exactly.
Yeah, so that's why we say pan-Indian Indian Ocean, which means all South of Asia.
Cultural group.
Exactly.
So, interestingly enough, Kantarodai, they haven't found any large structural features. So the only structural feature they have, only two they have found, part of a furnace and 3 post holes. But still there is no indication of any ramparts, which is a bit surprising because most of these early historical urban centers had ramparts to protect themselves. But here again it's built up largely. If you walk there, you wouldn't realize what you're seeing. There's a slight mound, but there's just normal homes and home gardens. So all the excavations taking place there have been in somebody's garden. And they are kind enough to give us permission to stay for a month and do it there. But yeah, it's interesting that you wouldn't really see it there, but below the surface, it's a completely different world.
Exactly. And also what's important to remember is when we say urban settlement, how we measure civilization and how it is advanced or not is in its artistry and certain beautification aspects that come in. The most rudimentary ones are the ones you would see as a base level. But when a society has artistic things like, say, beautified tiles on their roofs, pottery that is, carved or something or made, makeup, all that is a sign of what we call an advanced civilization.
We found like not the full cosmetic set, but thin copper implements which would have been used for eyeliners and things like that. So
Sri Lankans had it going from early days. It's nice to see. But see, this is why it's so interesting. But our early urban settlements, you're talking from 3,000 years ago, we had quite a few advancing. So it's not just the historical records, we're talking archaeological records here. So as Chryshane has shared with us, Anuradhapura, Tissa, Maharama and Kantarodai, you would never think these, Anuradhapura, yes, but the other two you wouldn't think would have these. So go out and learn more, because the more you know about your history, not just written historical records, but archaeological things, you understand where Sri Lanka has come from.
Yeah, and it takes out all these sort of the more nationalistic and popular narratives out, and you actually see the people and the material for who they are, what they were.
And also, and we will talk about in maybe a few other episodes later on about this identity also. I mean, what it was 2000 years ago is not what it is today.
Exactly.
Right. So there are different things. So we've come to the end of our episode, Chryshane. So thank you for joining us, and thank you for listening in. Stay tuned as we bring in more historical, archaeological and interesting facts about Sri Lanka's past as we try to understand Sri Lanka and we go forward. So thank you and stay tuned.
Thank you.